Hi, I'm Lorraine. My family erased my daughter from a birthday party photo, and that was just the beginning. They called her soft, cropped her out of memories, and tried to rewrite our lives like we were never part of theirs. How do you fight back when the people meant to protect you turn into the ones who hurt you the most? Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me, have you ever felt invisible inside your own family? What time are you listening to this, and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I'd really love to know. The sun dipped low behind the rows of oak trees lining Marjorie's backyard, casting long shadows across the pristine white tents and flower-strewn tables. I adjusted Callie's little blue headband and forced a smile as we walked toward the noise, laughter that sounded too sharp, too rehearsed. Somewhere deep inside, something coiled tight, whispering warnings I couldn't quite silence. Marjorie's parties were always performances, glittering lights strung across the trees, mason jars filled with perfectly curated wildflowers, and catered food displayed like works of art. It looked like a magazine spread, and somehow it always made me feel like an intruder in my own family. I spotted her near the center, champagne flute in hand, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When our gazes met, she tilted her head slightly, a silent acknowledgement, then turned away without a word. Mom stood nearby, clutching her purse like a life raft, flashing me that tight, brittle smile that said, "Don't start anything." Dad didn't even look up from his plate of cold cuts. Callie's hand slipped into mine, small and slightly clammy. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. I squeezed back, pretending to be stronger than I felt. When the time for presents came, each child was called forward to receive a beautifully wrapped gift bag, gold lettering, colorful tissue paper peeking out like confetti. Giggles filled the air as they tore into their surprises. Then it was Callie's turn. A woman I didn't recognize, one of Marjorie's minions probably, handed her a crumpled white paper bag. No glitter, no ribbon, just a yellow sticky note slapped on the front. "Try harder next time." Callie blinked, her mouth twitching as she looked up at me. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the laughter started, sharp, cruel, and unmistakably led by Marjorie. Some of the parents joined in, nervously at first, then more freely, as if relieved to have someone else to laugh at. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Callie opened the bag. Inside, a broken pencil, a half-melted candy, a dirty eraser. My heart cracked cleanly in two. I crouched beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "You're okay, baby," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. I caught Malcolm's eye across the lawn. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful. 16 years ago, a different party, a different backyard. I had stood there too, holding a paper plate of soggy cake, listening as Marjorie and her friends whispered behind their hands, laughing at the weird sister who never quite fit. I stood up, smoothing Callie's dress. "We're leaving," I said softly. Malcolm was at my side instantly, one hand resting protectively on Callie's back. No one tried to stop us. Not Marjorie, not Mom, not even the guests who had moments earlier been clapping for themselves for raising such inclusive children. We walked across the lawn, past the flickering lanterns and polished smiles, into the heavy summer twilight. The humidity clung to us like another skin. Callie didn't cry. She simply held my hand tighter, the way she did when she was a toddler afraid of thunderstorms. At the car, I buckled her in, hands trembling just slightly. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The road stretched ahead, dark and silent. Somewhere behind us, laughter still floated through the air, bright and brittle as broken glass. I didn't start the car right away. I sat there, breathing in the heavy scent of cut grass and regret, staring into the kind of darkness you can feel more than see. "This ends now," I whispered, so quietly even I barely heard it. The morning after the party hung heavy with a strange kind of silence. Sunlight crept reluctantly through the blinds, casting thin bars of light across the kitchen floor. Callie sat curled on the couch, her blanket pulled tight under her chin, wide eyes tracking dust motes floating in the air. She didn't say a word. I made coffee I didn't want, toast I didn't eat. Every move felt mechanical, like I was operating in a world that had subtly shifted overnight. The echo of laughter, the wrong kind, still rang in my ears. Scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe it hadn't been as vicious as it felt. Then I saw it. A notification from Marjorie. Such a beautiful day with family, blessed beyond words. The photo beneath it showed the entire group posed in front of the twinkling lights, smiles stretched wide, arms thrown around each other like a glossy magazine ad. Everyone was there, except Callie. Cropping her out wasn't accidental. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. And to punctuate the cruelty, Marjorie's captions screamed it louder than any megaphone could have. The ones who truly matter. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked once, twice, hoping it was a trick of the light. It wasn't. They had erased her, erased us. 16 years ago, I had stood at another family event, wearing a dress 2 sizes too big, hair brushed back so tightly my scalp burned, feeling invisible as Marjorie basked in compliments. "You know Lorraine," my mother had said once, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not really the showy type." Back then, I thought if I smiled hard enough, stayed quiet enough, they'd let me belong. This morning, watching Callie fidget with the frayed corner of her blanket, I realized how wrong I'd been. I set my coffee down, untouched, and stared at the screen. Comments rolled in beneath the photo. Beautiful family. What a lovely gathering. Likes, hearts, praise stacked higher and higher, each one another stone in the wall they built to keep us out. I should have known better. I did know better. And still, seeing it laid out so publicly, so shamelessly, carved a hole somewhere behind my ribs. "Mom?" Callie's voice was so small I almost didn't hear it. "Yeah, baby? Am I not part of the family?" Something cracked in me so hard I thought the sound was audible. I crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. "You are my family," I said. "You're the best part of my family." She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't fix it right then. I couldn't erase the ache I knew had already started to fester inside her. But I could make damn sure it didn't spread. I sat at the kitchen table long after Callie wandered back to her room. The Facebook app stared at me from the corner of my phone like a wound that wouldn't close. My thumb hovered, then pressed hard. I deleted it without ceremony. They didn't get to control the story. Not anymore. As the screen went dark, one thought burned cold and clear through my mind. They don't get to erase her. The grocery store should have been a safe space. Just rows of fluorescent lights, the hum of freezer doors, the smell of overripe bananas near the entrance. Yet as I pushed my cart past the produce aisle, the air shifted. Whispered conversations, darting glances, a laugh cut too sharp from somewhere behind the cereal shelves. I kept my head down, eyes fixed on the shopping list clutched in my hand. But it didn't matter. I could feel it, like static electricity prickling the back of my neck. At the end of the aisle, near the small cafe tucked beside the bakery, I spotted them. Marjorie and 2 women I barely knew but recognized from school drop-offs and PTA meetings. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I swear I wasn't. But their voices carried, brittle and smug. "I mean, bless her heart," Marjorie said, swirling a straw in her iced coffee. "Callie struggles with emotional regulation. It's not her fault, you know. Some kids just need a little extra supervision." The words hit harder than a slap. I froze behind a display of peanut butter jars, heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear the rest. One woman leaned closer, voice syrupy with false concern. "Is Lorraine getting her help?" Marjorie gave a tight, pitying smile. "She's trying. But you know Lorraine, always a little overwhelmed." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me want to burn the whole store down. I gripped the cart until my knuckles whitened, willing myself not to make a scene. Not here, not now. 16 years ago, after a particularly brutal family dinner, I had overheard Marjorie telling her friends, "Lorraine's just delicate, can't handle real life." back then I cried alone in the garage. This time I let the fury simmer, low and lethal. I finished my shopping without tasting anything. At the checkout, the cashier avoided my eyes. When I got home, I dumped the bags onto the kitchen counter and slumped into a chair. Callie's voice floated down from her bedroom, soft, humming to herself, blissfully unaware. My phone buzzed. A message from Mia, one of the few mothers I trusted at Callie's school. Heads up. Marjorie posted in the parent group, said something about some kids needing special supervision. Didn't name names, but everyone knows. I stared at the screen, nausea curdling in my gut. This wasn't just a careless comment over coffee. This was a campaign, calculated, strategic, designed to isolate Callie, and by extension me, from the only community we had. I closed my eyes for a long moment, breathing through the red tide rising in my chest. When I opened them, everything felt sharper, harder. I pulled out my old sketchbook, not to draw but to plot. Names, events, screenshots, dates, every slight, every whisper, every crooked smile disguised as concern. I would gather them all, no more playing nice, no more pretending the knife wasn't twisting until it hit bone. This time, I would bleed them first. I grabbed my laptop and opened a new folder, titled it simply, Receipts. As I clicked save, I whispered under my breath, if they want a war, they'll get one. The phone rang just after breakfast. I knew it would. Some things you can feel coming in your bones, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Sweetheart, Mom's voice said, syrupy and tight. Come over, we need to talk, as a family. I almost laughed. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness, said I'd be there, and hung up before she could lace her invitation with more lies. Marjorie's house loomed like a mausoleum, gleaming windows, manicured hedges, everything in place, except the truth. Malcolm offered to come with me. I told him no. Some wars you have to fight alone. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. They were all there. Mom perched on the edge of a love seat, Dad pretending to scroll through his phone, Marjorie standing tall like she owned the place, and a scattering of aunts and cousins who had no business being involved. We're worried about you, Mom began, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. This behavior, it's not who you are. Marjorie stepped forward, eyes shining with crocodile tears. Lorraine, you embarrassed all of us, publicly, over nothing. Over nothing. The words echoed in my head, setting off alarms I didn't bother to silence. We just need you to fix it, Dad said flatly, an apology, to Marjorie, to the guests. I stared at them, at the desperate, self-righteous faces that once convinced me I was the problem. 16 years ago, after I'd dared to speak up about how Marjorie sabotaged my scholarship application, they'd made me apologize for causing drama. Back then, I folded. Not this time. Still, I played my part. What do you want me to say? I asked, voice low. Relief flashed across Mom's face. Marjorie almost smiled, like they'd already won. Mom handed me a sheet of paper, typed, double-spaced. You can just send this to everyone who attended the party, she said sweetly. It covers everything. I read the first line and had to physically stop myself from tearing it in half. I deeply regret my emotional outburst, it began, and sincerely apologize for causing any discomfort during a day meant for celebration. Discomfort. Celebration. Like Callie's humiliation had been a minor wrinkle in an otherwise flawless day. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my purse. I'll take it home, I said. Look it over. Marjorie squeezed my hand as I turned to leave. This is what's best for everyone. Her nails bit into my skin. I didn't flinch. At home, I sat at the kitchen table, the apology letter spread out before me like an accusation. Callie colored quietly in the living room, humming under her breath, blissfully unaware of the knife her family had tried to bury between our ribs. I pulled out my laptop, opened the receipts folder, a new document, titled simply, Evidence, their words, their lies, their actions. They wanted a confession. They would get one, but not the one they expected. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and lemon zest. Callie stood on a stool beside me, sleeves rolled up, her tiny hands dusted in flour. For the first time in days, she laughed, a real, belly-deep laugh, and it stitched something raw inside me back together. We were baking a cake for the school's fundraiser. Nothing fancy, just something we made together, a little beacon of normal in a week that felt anything but. When we carried the cake into the school gym the next afternoon, the tables were already covered in baked goods. Neon signs, glittered posters, parents chattering too loudly. Marjorie was there. Of course she was. She swooped in the moment we set the cake down, her smile too wide, too bright. "Oh, how adorable," she gushed, looping an arm around my shoulder. "You know, I spent all night perfecting that frosting. Anything for the kids, right?" Before I could form words, she was already corralling teachers and other parents, beaming under the fluorescent lights as they clapped her on the back, praised her dedication. I stood frozen, Callie's small fingers clutching the hem of my shirt. My mouth opened, then shut again. "Just let it go," a little voice inside whispered. "It's not worth it." But something heavier settled in my chest, because it wasn't just a cake. It was Callie's laughter. It was our moment, and Marjorie had stolen it without blinking. Later, as we packed up, Marjorie breezed by, murmuring, "Next time, try harder, sis." The words were casual, cruel, surgical. We drove home in silence. Callie stared out the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. The next day, Callie came home from school with her backpack hanging off one shoulder, eyes rimmed red. "Mom," she said, voice breaking, They said you lied. That you said we made the cake, but it was Aunt Marjorie's." Her fists balled at her sides, trying so hard not to cry. "They called me a liar," she whispered. Every cell in my body screamed. I knelt, pulling her into my arms, feeling her little frame shudder. "They're wrong," I said. "They're scared of people who tell the truth." But Callie didn't believe me. Not really. I could feel it. The seed of doubt planted by whispers in hallways, snickers behind backs. 16 years ago, I had stood in front of my locker as classmates whispered that I only won art competitions because teachers felt sorry for me. Back then, I swallowed the shame whole and wore it like a second skin. I would not let Callie carry that weight. After she fell asleep, curled tight like a comma beneath her blanket, I sat at the kitchen table. The pile of receipts, screenshots, and old letters I'd collected spread out before me like battle plans. The house creaked around me, the only witness to the shift inside my chest, a quiet, surgical kind of rage, not loud, not reckless, cold, focused. I flipped open my laptop and added new files to the folder titled Receipts, dates, names, screenshots, a paper trail so long and tangled it would choke them all if I tugged hard enough. I stared at the glowing screen, my reflection dim and sharp in the black border. "You wanted a villain," I murmured into the stillness. "Congratulations, you made one." The invitation to dinner came wrapped in faux warmth, tied with guilt. Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "It'll be just us. We need to heal Lorraine." I almost didn't go. Every fiber in me screamed it was a trap. But some masochistic part of me needed to see how far they'd really fallen. Marjorie's house looked the same. Polished floors, curated photos, a home staged for admiration. Inside, tension gripped the air like a noose. Smiles were stretched too tight. Dad sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of something stronger than sweet tea. Mom fluttered around, performing normalcy. Callie clutched my hand as we took our seats. Her knuckles pressed white against my skin. Dinner started with polite small talk, each word more brittle than the last. The clink of silverware was too loud, too sharp. I chewed through dry chicken and fake laughter, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. Halfway through dessert, Dad leaned back in his chair, glass sloshing dangerously in his hand. His eyes slid lazily to Callie. "You know," he said, loud enough for every fake smiling face to hear, "this one's just like her mother. Software can't take a little heat without melting." A few strained chuckles echoed around the table. Callie's face crumpled. She shrank into herself, the way I used to as a child when those same words were thrown like knives across rooms packed with people who were supposed to love me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. 16 years ago, at another table in another house, Dad had leaned over and said, "Toughen up, Lorraine. Nobody likes a crybaby." I remembered the sting of shame, the burn of humiliation. I remembered promising myself I'd never let anyone make my child feel the way I did that night. I broke that promise. I grabbed Callie's hand and stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a violent sound in the brittle quiet. "We're done here," I said. My voice was steady. I was not. Marjorie gasped dramatically. Mom's mouth opened in protest. Dad just smirked and took another sip. I didn't care. I didn't owe them any more explanations. Not tonight. Not ever again. We left without looking back. The next morning I found the letter. It was stuffed into the mailbox. No return address. But I knew that handwriting. Tight, angry loops marching across the envelope. Inside, page after page, listed my failures like accusations carved in stone. You quit piano lessons. You dropped out of honor society. You chose art over law school. You let yourself go. Each line was framed as concern, but the venom seeped through every carefully chosen word. At the bottom, the final gut punch. You've always been a disappointment. Maybe it's time you accept that. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in my hands, while Callie ate cereal and chattered about her upcoming school project. I folded the pages neatly, slid them into a manila folder already fat with evidence. There was no sadness, no longing for reconciliation. Something colder settled inside me, a resolve sharp enough to cut through the years of gaslighting, the guilt, the manufactured shame. Family didn't humiliate you. Family didn't rewrite your story until you disappeared. Family didn't teach your child that she was something to be pitied, not celebrated. The illusions were dead. And in their place, a new truth crystallized, clean and cold. No one humiliates her again. The house grew quieter with each passing day, the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost accusatory. I spent those days sorting through every shred of evidence, every slight I had endured, building my case like a general preparing for battle. At night, the stillness settled into my bones. Callie colored pictures at the kitchen table while I meticulously labeled folders on my laptop. Receipts, voicemails, screenshots, the proof of every knife slipped between my ribs while I was expected to smile and thank them for it. The first message came just after midnight. "Lorraine, think carefully about what you're doing. Family should forgive, not destroy. Don't make this worse." I stared at the text, bile rising in my throat. Forgive, as if they hadn't been the ones wielding the axe. The second message followed an hour later, harsher, stripped of any pretense. "You're tearing this family apart. If you don't stop, you'll regret it." Regret? I let out a humorless laugh that startled Callie awake upstairs. 16 years ago, after I reported a teacher who had crossed a line with a friend, Mom had hissed at me, "You don't air dirty laundry. You fix things quietly." The school's cover-up had succeeded, and the friend left town. I'd learned early, truth was only welcome if it was convenient. The next morning, as I poured coffee into a chipped mug, the voicemail came. "If you don't drop this nonsense," Mom's voice warned, brittle and biting, "you and your daughter are no longer part of this family. We'll forget you ever existed." The words, once capable of shattering me, barely scratched the surface now. I saved the voicemail, attached it to my growing collection. My hands didn't even tremble. Later that day, I sat at the kitchen table with Callie beside me, her small fingers tracing doodles along the condensation on her glass. I wrote one simple line in my notebook: "Family isn't who erases you." The phone buzzed again. Another threat? Another plea masked in venom? I didn't bother checking. Instead, I opened a new email draft, attached every file meticulously gathered, addressed it to a lawyer I'd met months ago when I'd quietly started laying the groundwork, back when I still believed maybe it wouldn't come to this. Are you okay, Mom? Callie asked, voice small but steady. I looked at her, this bright, breakable thing they had tried to dim, and smiled. I'm perfect, I said. And so are you. With a single click, I sent everything. As the screen blinked back to neutral, I whispered, They made the choice. Now I'll make mine. My hand hovered over the mouse for a breath longer than necessary. Then I clicked, Send. It was done. The audio files, the screenshots, the documentation, every last piece of their cruelty bundled and fired like a cannon into the heart of the community they prized so much. The silence afterward felt deafening. By noon, the first texts arrived. Mia messaged a string of exclamation points. Another parent forwarded screenshots from the PTA group chat, now a wildfire of accusations, denials, and stunned outrage. The audio clip spread faster than I could have hoped. Marjorie's voice, unmistakably hers, dripping with contempt as she mocked Callie, called her a project, implied I was barely keeping it together. The recordings didn't need editing. The venom spoke for itself. 16 years ago, I had tried to tell the truth once before. No one believed me then. This time, the truth carried its own weight, and it crushed them. By evening, 3 families had pulled out of Marjorie's boutique contracts. Someone else posted a lengthy rant on Facebook about how appearances are deceiving without naming names, but everyone in our circle knew. I sat on the couch, watching Callie stack building blocks on the rug, oblivious to the storm outside our little safe house. A knock at the door jolted me back. Standing there was Jenny Park, an old family friend who had distanced herself years ago without explanation. She didn't step inside, just handed me a manila envelope, her expression tight. You'll want to see this, she said. Good luck. Inside, I found documents linking Marjorie's boutique to a string of shady vendor practices, fraud, unpaid invoices, false advertising. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It wasn't just personal now. It was professional, legal. 2 days later, the retaliation came. It started with angry pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw them, Mom, Dad, and Marjorie. Faces red, fists clenched. I didn't open it. Not at first. Lorraine, you need to come out here right now, Mom shrieked, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I cracked the door just enough to stare them down. You think this makes you look good? Dad barked. You're tearing your family apart. Marjorie lunged forward, mascara running, voice cracking. You think anyone's gonna believe a bitter little dropout like you? Get off my property, I said. Calm, icy. We'll sue, Mom spat. You'll lose everything. Then do it, I said. And while you're at it, explain to the judge why your case is built on slander, fraud, and recorded proof. The door slammed shut harder than I meant it to. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. Formal legal letterhead. A threat to sue for defamation if I didn't retract my false statements and apologize publicly. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages with detached amusement. They still thought I was playing checkers. I was already 10 moves ahead in chess. That night, I stood on the front porch, arms crossed, watching the sun sink behind the trees. Louisville bathed in pinks and golds that faded too fast. The war was ugly. It was brutal, but it was mine now. This is the end of their control, I whispered into the cooling air. Not mine. The air smelled different now, quieter, lighter. Weeks had passed since the last email, the final knock at the door, the last venomous message from a mother who once called me her sunshine. Louisville wore its late summer cloak, humid afternoons fading into crisp evenings, kids laughing as they chased each other through sprinklers. Normalcy had seeped back into my life in ways so subtle I barely noticed at first. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out at the backyard. No more threats, no more guilt-laced ultimatums, only the echo of what had been broken and the fragile, precious thing that had survived. 16 years ago, after another storm with my parents, I scribbled a note in my diary. Maybe if I stay small enough, they'll love me. Today, I would write something different, Maybe if I live loud enough, I'll finally love myself. Callie ran past the window, arms stretched wide, chasing fireflies that blinked like little promises against the dusk. She laughed, unburdened, whole. The sound carved a permanent place in my memory. I had lost so much. There were nights when the silence inside these walls felt like a wound. The family I fought to please for decades now existed only as a lesson. Blood ties are not chains. They don't get to define you unless you let them. The absence of apology from Marjorie, from my parents, didn't hurt the way it used to. I no longer needed their validation, their half-hearted justifications. Their silence was their confession. Their retreat was my liberation. Mia stopped by sometimes, bringing fresh-baked bread and gossip about the slow disintegration of Marjorie's boutique business. Vendors pulling out, clients canceling, whispers becoming roars. I didn't revel in it. I didn't need to. Victory, I realized, didn't always come with parades or loud declarations. Sometimes it came quietly, in the peace of a Sunday morning, in the easy laughter of a child who no longer flinched at the sound of her own name. I started painting again. Not the careful, technical pieces I used to do to impress gallery owners, but messy, vivid things that bled color and feeling. Malcolm hung the first finished canvas above the fireplace without asking. It was ugly and perfect, and when I caught Callie tracing the brush strokes with her fingertips, my throat closed up with something achingly sweet. Some wounds would never fully heal. The betrayal, the lost years, the nights spent wondering why I was never enough, they would live inside me like old scars that ached in the rain, but they were mine. They didn't own me anymore. As twilight deepened, I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. Callie darted through the yard, a net in one hand, her hair wild and tangled with the breeze. Watching her, I smiled through the tightness in my chest. I wouldn't shield her from every hurt. That wasn't possible. But I could give her this, a life where love wasn't something she had to earn by shrinking. They'll never touch her again, not while I'm breathing. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't loud. They're silent, steady, and deeply personal. Walking away from toxic people, even when they share your blood, isn't a betrayal. It's a survival. It's choosing your peace, your future, over their expectations. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. You don't owe loyalty to those who harm you. Family isn't defined by names on a tree. It's built by those who choose you every single day with love, respect, and kindness. Now, I'm curious, have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was supposed to be unconditional? What gave you the strength to finally choose yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you'd like to hear more real stories about resilience, healing, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being here.